All right, just tweeted it out right now.
All right.
Yeah, just tagged you in it. All right, what's up, Ted Calvin?
All right. I'm about to send something out too.
All right, just tweeted it out. Seems to be an echo.
No, that's not an echo. It was just a delay
Oh,
from the
okay,
feed
okay.
on my phone. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, okay, okay. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
All right, welcome everyone to Frank Analysis. I'm your host, Franco. The Colonial Pipeline is an East Coast oil pipeline that runs 5,602 miles from Texas all the way to New Jersey. As reported on Reuters, this is the largest U.S. refined products pipeline system and can carry more than 3 million barrels of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel between the U.S. Gulf Coast and the New York Harbor area. I've discussed on this show several times how the risk of leaks for these oil pipelines is extremely high and detrimental to the environment, and and it's also detrimental to our health. This is a result of corporate greed and prioritization of profit over safety. The mainstream and quote unquote progressive media is their silence on this issue is extremely alarming. So, joining me to discuss the poor practices of inspection and the recent North Carolina spill of this pipeline, as well as the media silence on this issue, is MCSC Network investigative journalist Robbie Jaeger. Thank you for joining me, Robbie. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for finally having me on. I've been seeing you. I've actually watched a few episodes of your show recently, man. You're killing it. So
Yeah, man, I
glad to
gotta
be
say,
on.
it's great to finally have you on. I've talked about your articles and findings on this show several times, so it's great to finally have you on. But before we get started, since this is your first time, I do want to begin by asking you how you got started as an investigative journalist and what motivated you to start doing this kind of work.
Well, I mean, it's kind of it could be a long answer, but long story short, I mean, I obviously had a lot of inspiration from I just always found something really supremely interesting about follow the money journalism
Mm.
and about like really deep dives into stuff. Like obviously, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, and their work is had a huge impact on me because I always felt like okay, uh, fact-based journalism based off of source documents. They basically just released the source documents and let everybody else, uh, you know, do the journalism for themselves. I'm not saying that they're not journalism. Don't get me wrong, but I just saw that with the constantly providing the receipts, and I was like, that's how journalism should be done. And then going forward, there was a few people here and there that I saw doing some really good journalism, even if they were working for publications that maybe we wouldn't necessarily want to trust nowadays.
Mm.
Um, and I was like, so it can be done even at a high level. And, you know, really how I kind of got going was on accident. I mean, really, I wrote an article based off of some WikiLeaks emails regarding the talent agency CAA and their blacklisting of Tulsi Gabbard during the after she stepped down from the DNC. And I was just like, okay, who are these people? It was just one of those
Mm.
things that I looked up and I wrote about what I found. Um, and it went viral immediately, and I did, and it was the last thing I expected, uh, you know, but it encouraged me to keep going, and then I wrote a few more, and you know, I just kept plugging at it, and now I've kind of adapted some right to what I do. I mean, I'm kind of more of a I do a lot of the political finance stuff for MCSC. Um, we're breaking stories constantly about campaign finance stuff. Who's funding who as far as like cabinet officials and stuff like that. And that's basically where I'm at now. I just keep plugging at it, and I'll let the stories speak for themselves.
Yeah, that Tulsi has enemies in high places article that you wrote is a classic. It's something that people need to bring up when they're talking about corruption in like TYT and some of these other mainstream outlets and politicians who are represented by these talent agencies. Another classic you have is the one where you're exposing the Sunrise Movement, which is also relevant to what we're going to be discussing here. Because where
Right.
are they, right? Where
Right.
is the Sunrise Movement on
Oh
this
yeah,
issue?
that was another one of the yeah. I mean, I, I never right, and nothing ever blew up quite as big as the Tulsi one, which is fine, you know. But I just it always surprises me, just how massive that one got. But yeah, one of the ongoing kind of investigations I've been doing throughout my time is keeping tabs on the Sunrise Movement, uh, because I mean, look, the information is out there for anybody that wants to see it. You know, they are your typical dark money nonprofit nowadays, and there's the information to back that up. And it's just always intrigued me how organizations like them kind of make a big name for themselves. Talking about very progressive issues, but they always they almost always just fall short of their ideals especially when it comes to money, which is why what I do is, I feel important, and I feel like it's something that everybody should be aware of. I mean, look, knowing who pays the bills uh, of the people that are getting on your television and getting on Twitter and pushing these certain narratives or ideas, it's there's always a reason to want to know that kind of thing. I mean, because it rules out or it brings into play possible conflicts of interest and stuff like that. So it's always something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so this pipeline, how did you first hear about it?
Sure. So I found out about it. I heard about it when it happened. Just because I live in the area, right? I'm in North Carolina.
Mm,
Um, but at Colonial's first estimates was 63,000 gallons, and while that still is terrible, that's not going to make national headlines. And once it happened, the initial little quick news story on the local networks down here, and then it was kind of over, right? I mean, they didn't really bring it back up until January, when Colonial Pipeline came back. And this was their second time revising their estimates. They had another revision earlier, a couple months earlier in November, where they had said, well, it's not 63,000 gallons, it's 230,000 gallons. But that didn't really get a lot of headlines. And then we jumped to January of this year, and that's when the news breaks that it was actually closer to 1.2 million gallons. And that's when it caught my eye. And I read the story. I forget who published it at first. And I was like, wow, that's a huge discrepancy. Like I don't know of any other profession where you can miss the mark on your math by that much
mm-hmm.
and still have a job. But be that as it may, it just started. It just piqued my interest, man, because I was just, that this just doesn't seem right. And I started digging into it then, really, and me not really having any access, right? And there's not going to be a lot of people at Colonial Pipeline that work there that are going to want to speak to me or, really tell me anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to find a different way to investigate them. And one of the ways I did was looking into their inspection records with the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And what I found there and the article that I wrote about it. It basically says, hey man, there's no surprise that we're having leaks like this when you're only checking less than half of your pipeline at most, in a year, and you're only checking, a minute amount of the mileage of your pipeline for certain corrosion, for certain dents, for certain stuff like that. The numbers are like they're staggering, quite honestly. I mean, how the country's longest pipeline
Yeah.
can get away with checking their pipes as little as they do.
Yeah. So this is the biggest leak in North Carolina in U.S. history that's ever occurred.
It's the largest gasoline pipeline spill in U.S. history. Uh, it's the largest pipeline spill of any kind in North Carolina history. It's one of the largest overall
Yeah.
pipeline spills in U.S. history. Um, yeah, it's a big deal. And so there's a lot of layers to this story, right? Which is why, I've been trying to talk about it as much as I possibly can because, so there's the one side with Colonial,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the numbers say, hey, well, back up. So the leak itself started from a crack, right?
Right.
Colonial Pipeline's 2019 inspection records show that out of the 5,600 miles of their pipeline, they only checked 650 miles for cracks. And in 2018, it's even worse. They checked only 150 miles of their pipeline for cracks. So between 2018 and 2019, they only managed to check just under 800 miles of their pipeline for crack. That's what eight. That's it's somewhere in
It's
that's a
less than ten
pathetic
percent,
percentage.
right?
Yeah, it's a pathetic percentage.
Yeah.
Uh, and it shows you that it's really kind of hard to find cracks in your pipeline when you're not checking it, right? When you're only checking like 14% of your pipeline for cracks. So that being said, you can look at the other numbers that they had, and regulators even said that, hey, these numbers are acceptable, which begins a whole other conversation, right? I mean, whenever you see numbers in Colonial's reports that are saying we only checked 900 so miles for dents, we only checked that
Mm-hmm.
same 900 miles for corrosion, we checked 650 miles for cracks, and that was pretty much it. But they found 305 anomalies in their line during that time. 305.
That's,
They made 180 repairs over the course of a year. And why is that? It's because the pipeline is old. It was built, most of it, like starting in the 60s. In North Carolina alone, 88% of the pipeline that runs through the state was built before 1980. So it's old and it's falling apart. And I mean, they were, I mean, PIMSA, the regulators, they even said in a report that Colonial was improperly keeping their corrosion inspection reports and not keeping them in adequate detail.
mm,
They also were saying that there were certain sections of the pipes that were running under navigable waterways that were going 5, 6, sometimes 10 or 11 months past their inspection dates, which, by the way, PIMSA only requires them to inspect their pipe once every 5 years, right? Um, which that's a sorry, and that's it. That's the regulation side failing.
mm-hmm.
Um, and that's where we're at now. It's kind of like we're waiting on one of these regulators to actually look at Colonial and say the way you've been doing business, because look, I mean, this isn't their first rodeo.
Mm-hmm.
They've had multiple issues in recent history. I mean, the biggest one being lately in 2016. I don't know if everybody remember on the East Coast, if you remember, there was a big gas shortage for a few days in 2016. The gas prices shot up and down the East Coast because Colonial Pipeline had to be shut down because there was an explosion in Birmingham, Alabama, when they were trying to make repairs, and it killed like 3 people. Uh, and it shut down the pipeline for days. Gas prices skyrocketed on the East Coast, which kind of plays into the thing now with Colonial. They know that they've got regulators and the government kind of in the palm of their hands, because I mean, what are you going to do? Shut us down? You're going to make gas prices go up into like the double digits all up and down the East Coast. So they've kind of, unfortunately, they've got regulators where they want them, because like, well, you're going to slap us with a fine. Colonial Pipeline is insured for like $30 million for environmental damages and stuff. So
Yeah.
they don't really care what they do. And, it's just, it baffles my mind how they've, not just them, but all the rest of these pipelines have been allowed to just do business like this,
Yeah.
um, without anybody, like you said earlier, like Sunrise Movement
Yeah.
or like environmental leaning progressive, politicians, like say a Bernie Sanders or even an Ed Markey, or
Oh gosh.
or somebody, right?
Yeah.
Somebody that runs on a platform of environmentalism and Green New Deal, this
Yeah.
climate change, that no more fracking, no more oil pipelines, which I'm all for. But you got to actually, when one of these companies is continuously just poisoning the ground and
Mm-hmm.
not taking their job seriously, uh, we need some public pressure. And
Mm-hmm.
as much as I like to take pride in my reporting, they're not listening to me. right? But they might listen to a Bernie Sanders if he were to actually use his platform to talk about something like this. Uh, so that's what I'm doing now. I'm just trying to put pressure. I mean, because this is a story that, I mean, look,
Yeah.
it's not too much to add. Like in North Carolina over the last 3 years, or I'm sorry, not just in North Carolina, but over the last 3 years, Colonial Pipeline has reported 60 issues or incidents to PIMSA. They're not all spills or not all leaks, right? But there are incidents of some sort. That's like one every 8 months. And, or I'm sorry, this kind of getting my numbers mixed up. I'm talking about it was North Carolina gasoline spills from Colonial Pipeline. There's been 32 in the last 20 years, right? So that is like one every 8 months. And it's like, we should expect the multi-billion-dollar pipeline to have less accidents than your typical
Right.
forklift operator, right? It doesn't make sense why this should just be continuously allowed to happen over and over and over again. To basically their only punishment is a strongly worded letter.
And these politicians, they should have been the first to find out about this. Like they should be having like ears all over the country, like finding out like, okay, what are some like issues that are happening around the country? Like this is something big. Like how did this not reach their office? Right. And also why do you think that the inspection process is so poor? Like these are, like you said, multi-billion-dollar companies. Why do you think that they're not prioritizing on inspecting it?
Well, that's a multi-layer. Well, first off, with the politicians and how it never got to their desk,
Yeah.
I don't know. I do know that. I mean, to a lot of people's credit, it is kind of 63,000 gallons, which was the initial report, isn't going to turn a whole lot of heads on a national level. Unless, of course, your Chevron facility spilling into the San Francisco Bay, in which case that 600 gallons means a hell of a lot, gets you a hell of a lot of news time. Which I made the point of is that, yes, while that 600 gallons, that footage that you saw of the oil floating in the water, it's terrible footage and it's shocking, right? But just imagine what 1.2 million gallons would look like, right? Because that's a potential future if we don't start, clamping down on these pipeline companies now with new regulations. And so, but whenever the new numbers came out, yeah, that should have been a national story almost immediately. I thought it was going to be. When I started investigating this thing, I was expecting tons of other indie journalists, not even indie journalists, but just journalists in general, we're going to be diving into this, and it was just going to be a flow of information coming out in the weeks after that report, and it just never materialized. I worked behind the scenes with some local reporters at a news station outside of Charlotte, kind of just sharing resources, just picking each other's brains, trying to find new information. But I haven't really been in contact with anybody else. It was brought to the attention finally, to Sunrise Movement of Durham, North Carolina, and the Sunrise Movement of Los Angeles. They both came to me and came to each other and said, "Hey, send us all the information you have on this. Let's organize. Let's talk about it. Let's get awareness on it." Unless something has changed in the last day or two, I haven't heard anything from them. I haven't seen anything from them. We somehow managed to get Bill McKibben, get his attention to the story, and he said he would try to work it into his article in the New Yorker, which he did. To his credit, he made the largest gasoline spill in not just North Carolina history, but U.S. history, worthy of like two sentences at the bottom of his as a footnote at the bottom of his article on something completely unrelated. Which, look, I guess technically he did what he said he was going to do, even though he put as much effort into the writing about the spill as he did writing the tweet that said he would try to work it in, because they were about the same in length. Which is fine, like if you don't have the time or you just don't care, like just don't respond, right?
Yeah.
I'm not the one that was trying to, beat down his door about it. Somebody, had just mentioned it, tagged him on one of the posts. And I was, hell, look, I've got a lot of issues with McKibben, and I've got issues with 350 and organizations like them. But if they want to put, if they want to raise awareness for this story, I'm not gonna hate on them for it. I'm not gonna stop them, because that's what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it's
Um,
what we're expecting, right? They're supposed to be environmental activists and advocates.
they
So,
just didn't take it seriously.
yeah, you would expect for it to be a whole entire article for in itself, for Bill McKibben to write, right? But yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. Like, for people who don't know, what kind of investigative work have you done into the Sunrise Movement, like, and into like Bill McKibben 350.org?
Well, me personally, I haven't done too much research into McKibben. Right,
Yeah,
there was a great article
Max Blumenthal.
by
Yeah,
Max
and
Blumenthal, that goes a lot more into detail about McKibben than I would
mm-hmm.
be able to. So I would definitely recommend that to anybody watching that wants to, you know more about the kind of the behind the scenes business side of things, right? That involve McKibben and the environmental movement, right?
Yeah.
Especially the nonprofit environmental
And he,
movement.
he did cite you in that article
He
too.
did. I am
Yeah.
cited in the article, some of my early research on Sunrise Movement.
Mm,
So, Sunrise Movement, to get off on a quick tangent here, Sunrise Movement, in particular, and why I have a beef with them and a long-standing beef with Sunrise Movement, is because they are not what they say they are, right? They say that uh, they walk around acting like they are some grassroots funded. They're just a bunch. We're just a bunch of kids. We're just a bunch of teenagers that care. Um, and to a there's a certain extent of that is true, right? I mean, there's a lot of local hubs that really are full of, young men and women that really do, that just want to make a difference, right?
mm,
Unfortunately, they're funded at a national level by a, basically just your average dark money group. And when I say dark money group, I mean they're a 501c4 nonprofit, which means that they don't have to disclose any of their donors or donation amounts, for that matter, to anyone for any reason whatsoever. That's a problem in the grand scheme of things, especially during primaries, when they're shouting down about Pete Buttigieg, about his fancy dinners, right? And they're yelling about the wine caves, and how everybody's using dark money, this, and how it's bad, and it is bad, but they are that, right? They've taken during the election, they were taking like $250,000 from George Soros's personal super PAC, which is funded by him and one of his own dark money nonprofits called the Fund for Policy Reform. It took $500,000 from the 1630 Fund, which was probably the biggest dark money spender during the 2020 elections. They spent about $60 million in trying to influence the election and funding pro Democrat super PACs. And they were getting all that money hand over fist. They've got institutional donors out the ass. They were birthed from they were basically birthed out of the Sierra Club,
mm.
which is its own problem, right? In which, by the way, Sunrise 350, Sierra Club, even Greenpeace, none of them have said anything about Colonial Pipeline. But they've all said a lot about DAPL, right? And that's a little distinction I've been drawing,
Mm-hmm.
is because while Dakota Access Pipeline is a blight on this country, right? And I don't approve of it at all. It's a much flashier story than Colonial Pipeline. I mean, for Dakota Access, obviously there's the tribal land dispute, which is a huge deal. There's not one in North Carolina over Colonial, right? Even though there could have been back in the day. I mean, because North Carolina is, it's got so much history of Native American culture in North Carolina and in those states. So I mean, I'm sure at some point, maybe in the past, that there was a huge dispute. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But currently there's not. Dakota Access has got a lot of celebrity attention.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, it's easy for politicians like an AOC or Bernie Sanders, and it's easy for really politically engaged groups like Sunrise Movement, or say a Sierra Club, to really jump into that fray, right? About Dakota Access, even though it's never spilled a drop, as far as I know. Um, you know, but it's easy for that because that's where the cameras are, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the attention is.
Yeah.
AOC isn't going to be getting any votes from many North Carolinians.
Mm.
So, and I hate to put it that way. And I would love for any of these people to prove me wrong. But if you're more offended at something that I've said about you than you care about, over 1 million gallons of gasoline getting spilled into the earth by a company that continuously poisons the environment for has for decades, then you're doing it wrong, and you're not, and you are really a fraud, like, honestly. And if you don't know about it, then fair enough. I mean, I don't see how you couldn't know about it by now. Because fortunately, it has been picking up a little bit of steam. Um, but now, we're in the conversation of, we all know now, because of the reporting that I've done, and other people have done, about how Colonial was just piss poor at taking care of their property, and they're slacking on regulate or on inspections, right? We've seen they've done $58 million in property damage since the beginning of 2017. $24 million of that property damage has gone, or it was strictly from the incident in North Carolina. There's been at least 3 people or 3 families that have been bought out of their home. There's 4,600 times the legal level of cancer-causing agents such as benzene in the groundwater in the area, which you would think this is a terrible thing, but it's happening in the middle of, and it happened in a nature preserve, which is
Mm-hmm.
home to at least one endangered species, and yet the EPA doesn't care because the drinking water is okay. I mean, when I reached out to the EPA, this is Joe Biden's EPA, people, not,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't, you can't blame Trump for this anymore, right? This is the Joe Biden EPA. I spoke to one of his appointees at the EPA, and they basically said that since the drinking water wasn't going to get anybody sick, and that the air quality wasn't bad, they're pretty much done here. And they're not gonna have much to do with it. And this is what I've said. I'm sure people that have been watching a lot of my interviews have heard me say this a million times by now, but you are the Environmental Protection Agency,
Mm-hmm.
right? Protection is in your name. And everybody knows, or most people have heard the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So please, somebody explain to me how the EPA is protecting something if they only show up after it's been destroyed. It sounds like a pretty worthless agency to me. But thankfully, um, state, and this is something that broke just within the last couple of days. Thankfully, state regulators in here in North Carolina, the NC Department of Environmental Quality, who have have an annual budget of $80 million, and they're taking on a company that's backed by the Kochs, that's backed by Royal Dutch Shell, that makes $1.4 billion a year. And they're trying to hold them accountable because federal agencies such as the EPA they've moved on, and PIMSA, the pipeline regulators, they've been silent, right? They've got an investigation pending from what I've been able to tell from them, but they have no timetable for when it's going to be complete and what the results are going to be. But the North Carolina regulators basically they looked at Colonial. Colonial sent them a 1,600 plus page document that was basically saying, this is what happened. Here's all of our scientific well testing results. Here's some aerial photos and stuff like that. And it was a massive document. And North Carolina regulators a couple of days ago sent them back 22 violations just pertaining to that report, basically saying, hey, you left out this, you left out that, you left out this wasn't detailed enough. Just running them through the woodshed, on just procedural stuff. And I could not have laughed harder because, they, at least somebody is at least, showing some kind of backbone in this situation. Um, you know, is Colonial Pipeline really afraid of the punishments from North Carolina DEQ? Probably not. Um, but DEQ pressing hard on this case could inspire PIMSA to levy their own fines, uh, and who knows, go from there. But we need to completely overhaul the way we do things with pipelines in this country. It's about damn time. I mean, for one thing, I mean, we need, obviously we need to hold the pipeline companies accountable, which never ever happens.
Right.
But we also need to dismantle pretty much PIMSA um, and rework it from the ground up. You asked me earlier, and I'm sorry if I've been running my mouth for forever. But you
You're
asked me
good.
earlier about um, how did it get to this point, right? Why
Hmm.
are regulations so soft? Why are regulations so terrible? And that's simply because that's how the government wants it. Because the API, the American Petroleum Institute, the world's largest oil and gas company lobbying group. They're like the NRA for lobbyists, just or for oil companies. Just think about that. Uh, they lobby, they run PR, right? They spend millions and millions of dollars on their member companies trying to get them good press and make things just as smooth as possible for them. Uh, and that includes writing regulations, or as they call them, industry standards, right? And the US government in multiple industries, not just oil and gas, but multiple industries, um, they actually say, hey, whenever possible, use those industry standards instead of coming up with your own. So whenever you've, but so in this, and look, I was making this point earlier. When it comes to like welders, right? You could, that's not a huge deal. You can have a bunch of welders say, hey, this is the best way to be safe doing welding.
Hmm.
Um, it's just the industry they're in. But you can't. I don't know if I would afford multinational, multi-billion-dollar oil and gas companies. To I wouldn't. I'm not sure if I'd afford them that same luxury. You don't get to write your
Hmm.
own rules after you've spent decades, blatantly cheating. Um, so I mean, we have the tools to actually get this done in the next 4 years if Democrats really, really want to. Um, but so we'll see. But they have to care, and that means pressuring them and making it an election issue. Quite honestly, because they don't care unless they're scared of losing their seat.
Yeah, yeah, we got to make them feel that urgency. And the only way is if we apply public pressure. But yeah,
Right.
since with this media silence, and they're not gonna, like you said, they're not gonna care. They might not even know it's even happening because that's just how much they don't care. So, Ali Alexander, who's in the chat right now, she's a Chicago journalist. She brought up an excellent point. She said that there's the same type of operations that are in the Sunrise Movement and other, environmental organizations is very similar to the way that the DSA runs. And they, like you mentioned, like Dapple, like they need like these like stories sometimes, like the flashy stories to pretend like something is being done. And it's to make people think, okay, they're taking care of things right now. Like these organizations exist, so they're doing the work, but they're not. Like, for example, with this pipeline spill that nobody's talking about, what kind of environmental uh, consequences have you heard about?
Well, I mean, look, as far as environmental consequences, I mean, the consequences are, I mean, people have been moved out of their homes. The cleanup could take years. Um, the groundwater is beyond poisoned, right? Um, so thankfully, like it could have been a million times worse. It could have happened, and it could have spilled into the Mississippi River, or it could have spilled into the Gulf of Mexico. It could have spilled into a highly populated area in between. Um, and while you know it has been, and that's another reason that it makes it not flashy. Like there's not a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of people that can't drink out of their wells. Um, by all accounts, there's probably a lot of people that look at the story and walk away from it like, whew, that could have been a lot worse. That's not bad at all. I thought it was going to be way worse. But it's still terrible. And if anything, even if you don't really care about the environmental damage that was done just to the earth, to the planet, from that, you should at least care about the negligence that continuously allows these incidents to happen. And you should at least care. And look, if you care about Dapple, um, look, in a perfect world, I would say no pipelines, right? But it's not a perfect world. In the world we live in, the realistic world, I would say no new pipelines. Um, I think that's very possible. But the fact of the matter is that Dapple does exist. And until somebody really shuts it down, which once they start going, it's almost impossible to shut them down because people start seeing that money from them. Uh, and, so Dapple exists and it runs. And while their inspections in 2019 showed that they inspected about 750 some odd miles of their 1,600-mile pipeline, which is roughly half, right? They didn't check anything for cracks. It's a much newer pipeline, but regardless, they should be checking the whole thing for all of it every single year. And especially whenever you're 1,600 miles long, there should be no excuse why you can't do that in a year. But I digress. The fact is that they checked that even in that one section, that 700 some odd mile section of DAPL that they checked in 2019, they only found one anomaly. Okay, one. Uh, Again, flash over to Colonial. They checked anywhere between 980 to like 2,400 miles of the pipeline. They found 305 anomalies and they had to make 180 repairs. So if you care about DAPL, you need to care about Colonial, and you need to put pressure on Colonial and get your politicians and activists to put pressure on Colonial to clean up their act. And we need to put pressure on regulators to make them clean up their act and tighten up these regulations. Because if we don't, in about 20 years, DAPL is going to look exactly like Colonial. They're going to be checking less than half their pipeline. They're going to get hundreds of anomalies. They're going to be spilling every few months or having some kind of incident. And now, then we're going to have Colonial leaking everywhere on one side of the country. We'll have Dakota Access on the other side of the country leaking everywhere. And by then, the Enbridge line in Michigan will be done. And that'll probably just starting to deteriorate and start leaking everywhere. And then we're just going to be bleeding oil all over this country, which, like I said, DAPL is a blight. But if we don't do something about Colonial, then that's what DAPL is going to turn into. And the government has kicked this can down the road for decades because money talks, and these oil companies have been running our government. I mean, hell, the first thing that Donald Trump did when he got into office was he put ExxonMobil in Secretary of State. And even though that didn't last very long, and that's not a blip on the radar. Like, so a Democrat, while they put a bunch of Raytheon people, Biden did, in his cabinet, right, and a bunch of war profiteers, venture capitalists that buy up little defense companies and stuff like that. That's what Biden was interested in. But that's also because there's so much public scrutiny on taking oil money now that even Democrats like Biden know that there are some things that are off the table now, right? Just from a PR standpoint, and he knows that he's not going to be able to take oil guy, Exxon money, or have any kind of associations with them. But Republicans don't have that problem. And for years, oil and gas companies such as Exxon and Shell have had seats at the table. And they've put millions of dollars into politicians' pockets, and which is a trend that still continues. And that's why politicians don't really care. And because they say, oh, what do you want us to do? You want us to jack up the gas prices? It's like, no, I want you to spend take away a lot of this war budget, and let's actually really apply some of this money to some actual R&D. Because I feel like the research and development part of trying to find some kind of sustainable, clean energy and fuel. Look, when I was coming up, that was the only thing anybody was really talking about, was trying to find new fuel sources. And maybe I'm out of the loop, but I feel like that conversation has really died down. Like I haven't heard of any really new, like on the cusp of a breakthrough kind of clean fuel sources being developed. And That should be our number one priority.
Yeah.
Is because the day we do that, we can we can start weaning ourselves off of oil and gas pipelines, and we can really start the transition to a cleaner environment. Um, but until somebody puts up some kind of alternative to fossil fuels other than electricity, unless the electric car really does take off, unless somebody comes up with some other kind of fuel source, I'm afraid, I could be wrong, but I'm afraid that the problem with the oil pipeline companies will persist. We got to get off of fossil fuels, right? That's just
Mm-hmm.
got to happen somehow, some way. And until we do that, we're going to keep having more and more of these companies trying to build more and more pipelines. So yeah, we need to take Colonial Pipeline seriously, even though they didn't poison a bunch of people's drinking water. Um, Again, just imagine if that 1.2 million gallons were to have spilled into the San Francisco Bay. Um, it would have been catastrophic. And until we start tightening down regulations and enforcing these companies, I mean, Colonial Pipeline needs to sit before Congress and explain themselves as to why they think that their track record is acceptable. And it's a joke. The American Petroleum Institute gave them the safety award, gave them their
Wow.
largest safety award in 2019, which is absurd. Uh,
They get rewarded
I just don't get it.
for incompetence. Like if you
Yeah,
do
they
a
get
horrible job, you
rewarded.
get rewarded.
It's a publicity thing. It's a PR thing, right? Colonial Pipeline is a couple of years removed from a huge incident. Like I said, the explosion in Alabama, and of course, the API is going to make them look good. I mean, this. I mean, look, Colonial Pipeline has a vice president named Angela Kohler that not only chairs a committee uh, at the American Petroleum Institute, but she also sits on the Rules Advisory Committee for PIMSA, for for the federal regulators. Colonial Pipeline has a seat at the Rules Committee uh, at the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration. So does Enterprise Products Partners, and so does I want to say I might be wrong. I don't want to say it was either Sunoco, but you get it. There's 15 members of this rules committee. Five of them are oil companies, right? Five of them are appointees, and five of them are from like emergency services. So we're going like fire marshals, air quality experts, stuff like that. But out of all the companies in the country that deal with oil and gas, out of those, there's only five of them that get a seat at that table, and Colonial is one of them. And they constantly, wet the bed on inspections and incidents and spills, and yet they minimum punishment. I mean, because the regulators' first course of action is to send you a strongly worded letter and give you 30 days to make it right. And God only knows, if these companies are really actually taking them seriously. So I don't know. We really need public pressure. We need help from the people that are supposed to be pushing these messages.
Yeah.
As bad as it pains me to like we need the help of an AOC. We need the help of a Bernie Sanders or
Mm-hmm.
the help of a Tulsi Gabbard, right? I mean, she
Yeah.
wrote the Off Act. She obviously cares about this type of stuff, whether or not she knows about it, but that's what we're here for. Like the story is out there, the information is out there, it's developing as we speak, right? I mean, I'm keeping up with this thing every day, um, and people just don't know about it. It's been a complete media blackout because people are trying to. It's not a flashy story.
Mm-hmm.
People would rather talk about Trump, or at least the mainstream media would still rather talk about Trump. And they're going to keep him in the spotlight as long as they can because then their ratings are going to bottom out, and then they're going to be faced with the fact of either having to cover the Biden administration critically and lose the rest of their viewers, or because they just want to see people suck up to the president, or they're going to have to invent another boogeyman, in which case we'll get another 4 years of focusing on that boogeyman instead of all the other problems.
Yeah.
So it's up to independent media like us, which is why I'm really glad that we've kind of, in the last few months, we've kind of galvanized this little, like a really close knit community of us.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously Nico, myself, Fee, Pasta, Misty, Steve over at Slow News
All the
Day,
people who had you on to
Jesse.
talk about this topic.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Slow news
yeah,
day.
well, also, well,
Yeah.
yeah, Slow. Well, Steve's my guy.
Yeah.
And Well, yeah, I mean, but I make the rounds here and there, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whenever, but because these are my people, you know, these are
Yeah.
the people that I respect in what we're doing. And I'm not saying they're the only people I respect, but for whenever I think of indie media personalities, I'm not thinking of the ones with the check marks, right? I'm thinking of you guys, right? I'm thinking of Misty and Jesse. I'm thinking of you. I'm thinking of Steve. I'm thinking of Nico. Uh, and which is why I'm glad we're kind of banding together here, especially on stories like this. And it's not just because it's my story. Like, look, I haven't made a dime off this story, and I don't care. I don't care if I ever do. Um, this is just something that is important to me on a just on a virtue level, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I try to stick when it comes to my journalism. I try to stay out of the opinion game. Like obviously on Twitter, I might go on my rants here and there, and that's fine. But when I write my articles, I don't like writing opinion pieces, right? I like writing, just factual articles, and I save my opinions maybe for like like an interview, like I'm doing now, or when I'm just bullshitting on Twitter. But you know, I I just want the information to get out there,
Yeah.
right? And I don't want to editorialize it. I don't want anybody to try to, you know, and that's the thing is that it can't be spun in any kind of sensationalized way. It's a
It's
very
just the
cut and dry
facts.
story.
Yeah.
It's a very rickety ass pipeline. It's old and it's falling apart. It spills all the time, and regulators have allowed it to have allowed Colonial Pipeline to get away with it for decades, and it's got to stop. And there's got to be a way to stop it now, and that's by pushing it. So, like I'm not sure if I've said so, but thank you so much for
Mm.
bringing me on to talk about it because I want to do my part. You know.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you for coming on, man. And you brought up a great point about how the discussion for alternative energies has died down, and the Green New Deal. What do they bring up? Like, do they bring up enough of about alternative energy? Like, there's not enough discussion on like geothermal or nuclear or hydroelectric. Instead, the Green New Deal, what it allows is it gives room for more imperialism, so we can still go to other countries and take cobalt, lithium, and from other countries, so that we can use that to build like electric batteries, and then that further creates environmental destruction. We're still going to be over exploiting resources from all these other countries, and we're still going to be installing puppet governments that allow the U.S. and the Western powers to do that. So there's not enough solution. There's no real solutions that are being created by these organizations when we really need them to, right?
Right. And I mean, look, I'm not a scientist, right?
Mm.
I don't know. I can't come up with the solutions by myself. Like look, I know that about there's lots of discussions I see about, how to like using nuclear energy or geothermal to power, houses, cities and stuff like that. But there's not I haven't really seen a whole lot of conversations about, and like again, maybe I've missed them, but I feel like I've there's have been a lot of conversations on how we're going to power transportation
Yeah.
outside of the new wave of electric vehicles. Obviously Tesla, right, is the most in the spotlight. But there's lots of electric battery cars or a lot of electric vehicle manufacturers that are starting to make big moves in the government now. So or getting big help from institutional investors. A couple of quick notes. There's an electric bus company named Proterra. Um, or I'm sorry, Department of Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm, right, has or had. I'm not sure if she's divested yet. I haven't seen the certificate come across the feed yet. But so as of now, as far as I know, she still maintains like a $5 million, partial ownership stake or stake that was given to her as member of the board of this electric bus maker. Um, so that might not sound huge, right? But whenever you've got uh, you know, obviously Biden is going to, or these companies are expecting uh, Joe Biden's administration to create a larger market for electric vehicles. And they're going to do that by regulations or expanding or whatever they're going to do. They're going to write new laws, they're going to write new regulations to make things better for those companies. And Proterra is about to go public in within the next couple of months. So look, these companies are about to make a lot of money. George Soros just invested hundreds of millions of dollars into an electric battery manufacturer named QuantumScape. And they're also in the market for trying to get some government contracts, and they're trying to the industry is about to explode. And maybe electric is where they're going to go. I don't see the Green New Deal being a part of it, though. I mean, I feel like hasn't Biden pretty much shut that door?
Yeah, he said he doesn't support it. He said
Right.
it even before he became president, which is even worse. Because
And that's not but that's not but honestly, the Green New Deal wasn't going to solve
it
everything.
wasn't exactly. Yeah,
And so I mean, but it's a good talking point for Sunrise Movement, right? It's a
yeah,
great talking point for AOC, because it hits all the right buzzwords, right? You're
yeah.
playing off the FDR New Deal. You put the word green in front of it. I mean, that's political dynamite. Uh, and like I said, the Green New Deal isn't going to stop Colonial Pipeline from spilling oil all over the place, nor will it stop DAPL from doing that either. Because there's no way, like there's no real that's the problem, is that whenever you start looking into the Green New Deal and start talking about transitions, the waters start getting both the waters and the language start getting a little bit murky,
Mm.
right? So I mean, that's why I feel like, plus that bill has been, or not really bill, but that whatever that is,
Something that a high schooler
the
wrote. Yeah,
resolution or whatever they call it, has been sitting around for years now. And I'm afraid now, like even if you were to try to dust off the 2016 or 2018 Green New Deal, it's still going to be inadequate. It's going to need a rewrite entirely by now. I mean, things have changed so much, even since the Green New Deal first was written, that even if it was inadequate then, it's surely inadequate now. And I just feel like nobody wants to have that discussion. That was my other big beef with like Sunrise Movement, is that we're all for climate change regulations. We're all for making the environment a better place, but Sunrise Movement and groups like that were so rigid in their belief that if it wasn't going to be if we weren't going to save the environment via the Green New Deal, then all the cards were off the table, right? They
yeah.
weren't gonna they were not open to any other method of environmental change if it didn't involve the Green New Deal, as if that this is the gold standard and it can't get any better. And if we're not going to do it our way, then we're going to take our balls and we're going to go home.
And they don't even know that the Off Act exists. Like if you ask some of these
Oh, they
Sunrise
shit
Movement
on it.
activists, yeah, they don't know it exists, or when they hear about it, they shit on it just because it
Yeah,
doesn't have the buzzword Green New Deal. There's no
yeah, because
discussions.
and that's it. And I think we saw that too,
Yeah.
with the Medicare for All discussion.
Oh yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're not using the brand name, you're going to get shit on for it. You're going to get, if you're not using it, well, it's not called Medicare for All. He didn't call it Medicare for All. He didn't call it the Green New Deal, or she didn't call it the Green New Deal. And it's like, who gives a shit what it's called? Like, what does it say? Is it any good? I think that, I love the Off Act. I think there are good parts of the Green New Deal. I never understood why they had to be mutually exclusive, and why we couldn't just come to the table and kind of take the best parts of both and make a better one. But
Yeah.
because it baffled my mind. But then when I think about it, like it's typical primary politics, like two people that are supposed to be on the same side have ideas about the same issue, and they both have their merits. So in a normal world where you would just take the best of both worlds, combine it, come up with something really great, it's so damn competitive. It was like, oh, just because Tulsi wrote that, I don't want nothing to do with it, no matter how good it is. And for a certain extent, it was the same way for a lot of Tulsi supporters too. Like, because there was that huge rift eventually, and we just kind of shut down. We shut it out. but the topic of environmentalism was front and center, and all we did was argue about the name of the bill instead of actually arguing about what the actual solutions were. And here we are. We could have started ironing this problem out years ago, but politics got in the way, and it's time for that to stop. We gotta push politics to the side. We gotta push like all this petty YouTube and Twitter beef, that we get into, with other so-called journalists and activists that I'm not going to say by name. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
you know, they're out there and they know who they are. But we got to the more we focus on them, the less we focus on the work. And that's why we got to put this shit aside. We got to get serious, man. Like, yeah, the Trump administration is over, and all of you liberal journalists out here, like, you got to get your head out of your ass because it's time to work now. We can't. I'm not going back to brunch. I was never at brunch to begin with, so it doesn't matter to me. And but we're gonna need all the help we can get because we know how Democratic administrations go, and they're very sneaky with their corruption, and they get by with it because the media ignores them. And quite honestly, I feel like reporting critically on the Biden administration for a lot of these networks nowadays is it's a good way to get shown the door. It's very reminiscent of post Iraq war, journalism in the early 2000s. If you came out on the airwaves and were anti-war right after we invaded Iraq, or George W. Bush invaded Iraq, you couldn't come out on the airwaves and be anti-war. You'd get fired from MSNBC, no less. Like, that's what the sentiment is. And I feel like now it's like, if you're not strictly anti-Republican, you have no place in mainstream journalism. And it's the worst thing to happen to journalism is, quite frankly, all the money that's involved in it. You know what I mean? So, I don't know, man. We're in a tough spot, but like I said, I'm glad we got each other in this fight, and we just gotta keep pushing.
Yeah, yeah, and I do want to leave this message for everybody. Politics is not supposed to be about team. It's not supposed to be like team sports. All right, it's not supposed to be a competition. It's supposed to be collaborative. Propaganda. The chat brought up a great point. We need to stop talking about names, including names of people, like names of politicians and names of bills, and start talking about the issues, and how we're going to solve all these problems. How we're going to create, solutions. So yeah, Robbie, are there any final words you want to leave the audience with?
Sure. You guys can find me on Twitter and at Rockfin, or on Rockfin rather, at Robleto Fire, Robleto Fire. I spend a lot of my time. I break a lot of news on Twitter. I put all of my articles on Rockfin. So follow both. That's where I'm primarily at. Other than that, if you or anybody watching or any of your audience has 5-10 minutes tonight that you're bored, you don't have anything to do, I encourage everyone to take a couple of minutes and maybe read some literature on autism and its effect on children. It's just so we can start building a more inclusive and educated world for our neurodivergent brothers and sisters out there.
Yeah, 100%.
Other than that, that's it for me, guys.
Yeah, yeah. And Robbie, I look forward to having you on again when you break more of these stories. You do fantastic work, brother.
Anytime.
Yeah. All right, everybody, take care. Don't forget to stay informed. And